Now I'm going to draw the attention of our audience and viewers to another very important aspect of people's being agent to different people. Why does one become an agent? For what purpose? To gain honor, to gain financial benefits, to gain properties, etc., or any other support. If not, then such a man is not fit to be an agent of anybody, because he must be a madman who is serving somebody without rhyme or reason or anything whatsoever, without the least reward. So let us find out who has planted Hazrat Masih Maud-e-Islam. The one who has planted, he must benefit him for that. He must reward him. Now they say it was the British who planted him. So what reward did the British give him? Where and how? Not a single evidence has ever been produced by these people that either Masih Maud himself or his family or his community gained any financial advantage whatsoever. Nor anyone can prove that he got any titles like Allama Iqbal was called Sir Muhammad Iqbal. So he didn't receive a single title from them. On the contrary, the family property or estate which he had inherited for a long time from the long rule of the area by the family was gradually lost to the Sikhs until very few villages around were left within the control of the family. Now when the British came, because the situation of the Sikhs also was reversed, instead of being the absolute rulers there, they suddenly were brought to just nothing. There, Hazrat Masih Maud-e-Islam's father thought this was a fit time to sue the not sue, but to bring the case to the British government's notice so that they could rehabilitate our lost property. Hazrat Masih Maud-e-Islam advised him strongly against it. He said, it's better to remember God and come closer instead of wasting your good money after this. He was not interested in worldly states, but he wouldn't listen. So they continued to try with the British government and also made long pleas and appeals to the decisions taken adversely against them to the higher courts and higher government officials. The result was that not a single inch of the land confiscated by the British after the change of the government was ever returned to the family. Not a single inch. All cases were lost. What a grand agent it was. Nothing was granted to him by way of Jagir, as we call it, estate granted as a gift or a reward by the governments is called Jagir. Instead of granting him any land out of his services, the one who cried loud at his being agent, Maulvi Muhammad Hussain Batalvi, he was granted 25 squares, how many squares of land? 25 acres or what? He was granted many squares of land by the British government itself. For what? He was telling the whole world that Mirza Ghulam is the agent. That is why he was rewarded. Four squares, 100 acres of land, excellent land, was granted to Maulvi Muhammad Hussain for opposing Masih Maud-e-Islam. Can any man with an iota of common sense believe this hocus pocus nonsense? The one who is agent, according to them, is not even given back his genuine rights. All the family properties are confiscated, despite the fact that the family elders had helped the British rehabilitate, the Punjab and have a command of Punjab as against the Sikhs. They got ultimate victory, and the Punjab was brought back to peace, where Muslims were given their old rights which they had lost to the Sikh states. Like they are doing to us nowadays in Pakistan. No Ahmadi, it's illegal for an Ahmadi to say Azan. Exactly the same thing happened to Muslims at the hands of the Sikhs. And they said, you see, they helped the British. But what for? Against whom? Against a common enemy of the Muslims at that time, which had made life miserable for the Muslims. And the historians have written about this. Tanur mein baat hain historians ki. Some historians of what was happening there at that time. If not, we'll find out. Everybody knows. Everybody who knows the history of the Punjab, he knows that the situation of Muslims in the Punjab during the rise of the Sikh anarchy was most miserable. The only years of peace they enjoyed relatively was during the rule of Ranjit Singh. He was a great Sikh king, a prince who rose to a great power, and he was genuinely an honest man, and he was a just person. So it was that during his reign, ultimately, the Muslims started breathing in peace. But then, when he was no more, again, anarchy returned. And it was during this period of the anarchic rule of the Sikhs, many missiles they were called, when the Muslims were mercilessly treated. When this family helped the British to rehabilitate, to bring about the British Raj, to bring peace to the Muslims. Now, there is a reason, of course, obvious. If they don't like it, let them not like it. But despite all these services, Hadhrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian was not granted a single penny out of the British coffers. Not a single acre of land confiscated by the British themselves was ever returned to the family. Those who were working against their so-called agent, they were rewarded. Hadhrat Masih children were never rewarded. The Sar, the children who were Ahmadis, who were from Hazrat Ammajan, none of them would ever dream of accepting a title from the British. But Iqbal, the great poet of the East, who opposed Ahmadiyyat, he was entitled Sir Muhammad Iqbal. So what a strange story we have of the agents. Where is the reward? Show us. Prove it now. I give a challenge. However was Ahmadiyyat rewarded in any form? But why should they have rewarded Ahmadiyyat anyway? Because we were the main opponents of the spread of Christianity, not only in India, but all over the world. And we still continue to do that. See? Please. Now, I draw your attention to some aids given by the British to some great house of Muslim religious training centers. The most famous the world over is Devband, which is in fact the biggest factory of mullah making in India. And this was founded by the Lieutenant Governor of UP, was it, or Lieutenant General, Viceroy Representative?
Lieutenant Governor.
Lieutenant Governor, yes. Sir John Scott. No, this is Nahdlatul Ulama. I'm talking of Devband. Devband also was funded by the British. This University of Ulama was funded by the British and founded by the British. And there was a small Ahmadiyya school in Qadian founded by Hadhrat Masih Islam. Poor humble effort to create real God-fearing ulama. Not a penny was granted as a fund or aid by the British government. Not a penny. All records, and no ulama before have even alleged, although they could tell lies, I know, but God did not permit them even to allege that, look here, the most Ahmadi institutions, educational institutions are funded by the British. Every penny was collected through chanda. Masih Islam made appeals and people granted. That is how Ahmadi institutions were run and are still run. And these great houses of the Anti-Ahmadiyya religious scholars were funded by the British, were in fact founded by the British, as we have the evidence here of Nadmatul Ulama. It's a great Nadmatul Ulama. Its founding stone was laid by His Excellency Lieutenant Governor Bahadur, the title, no, of Mamalik-e Muttahida, वो यूपी है, United Provinces, of UP, United Provinces. His name was Sir John Scott. This was done in December 1908. But before that, वो कहाँ गया? देवबंदी है. Devband, I know, we don't have the reference here, but we'll get the references, was continuously funded by the British government. Why? We were their agents and they were paying them. It's a strange thing. But the question is then, whose agent Hazrat Masih Islam was? He was working, as if he had lost everything for the sake of some mission, he was completely lost in that. He has to be some agent. So we can find out who helped him, who promoted his cause. He has to be the master who founded him, who planted Mirza Ghulam, and that is Allah. When everybody had abandoned him, his own family, everybody, then Allah showed him certain signs of His own nearness and stood up with him. And I'll quote only a few ilhamat and wahi of Hazrat Masih at the period when all ulama, even his own family members, had totally abandoned him. He left alone. There was God and he. There was no British either to help him and to support him. Then Allah told him that दुनिया में एक नज़ीर आया मगर दुनिया ने उसे कबूल ना किया, मैं उसे कबूल करूंगा और बड़े जोर और हमलों से उसकी सच्चाई को जाहिर कर दूंगा. Then he said, मैं तेरी तबलीग को ज़मीन के किनारों तक पहुंचाऊंगा. That a warner came to the world and the world rejected him. But God has accepted him because it is His warner. And He would see to it that with great signs, which would be awful signs and overwhelming signs of punishment and others, God will prove the truth of His own warner which He has sent. Then He says, they say you will be confined to Qadian and die here and nobody would know your name. That is what His opponents were saying. You will die out, they say, and even the inhabitants of Qadian, after a generation or two, will forget your name. What Allah told him was a different story. He said, मैं तेरी तबलीग को ज़मीन के किनारों तक पहुंचाऊंगा. I promise that I will convey your message to the corners of the earth. Don't worry, don't be disheartened. Then about his family which had abandoned him. 100%, the entire family had abandoned him. So this was the man, how could he be supported by anybody? He was left totally helpless. One day God told him, سَيَنْقَطِعُ مِنْ آبَائِكَ وَيُبْدَوْ مِنْكَ. Remember this. All the family you have in the past, the family of your elders or the family members, al-usra, will be finished. And the family will begin from you now. You will be the founder of a new family. The previous family will be finished. After this ilham, Hadhrat Masih explained this by pointing out that this means, he said this means that those of my family members who would reject me and will not accept me as Allah's representative in the world, they would die without leaving any progeny. And no progeny would be left ever to be seen from them. They would be totally finished. And my progeny would increase, and only those of the family who would accept me, Allah will bless their progeny and they will spread, none other. It was a very big claim. The mullahs don't realize how big the claim was. He was one in the family of 70 when this ilham appeared. And what we see is a strange thing. They begin to die one after the other, leaving either no issue or some daughters, which again died without leaving any issue. Not a single exception there is in the world. I have been challenging the whole world. Oh, mullahs, please bring one of the old family members of Masih Maud who rejected him and still continues through his progeny to be present in the world. Only there were 2 or 3 exceptions. In every case, the one who left a progeny were Ahmadis from that family. Even here in the television team, there are children of Mirza Ghulam Sahib, late Mirza Ghulam Sahib. He was the son of Mirza Chiragdin. And Mirza Chiragdin didn't accept Masih Maud Islam. But still, strangely, he left a son. And people started, pointing at him. Look, his father never accepted him, and he still has a son in him. Mirza Ghulam Muhammad himself became a very staunch Ahmadi himself. And then we understood the meaning, All the rest were totally wiped out. No exception to the rule. There is one man who was healthy enough to lead a married life and bear children. But suddenly, something went into his head and he himself rendered him incapable of marriage. Nothing like that. I have spoken to one person who was an old family servant who used to take care of Mirza Chiragdin during his last days. Their house was very close to us. It was a big house. All the property which had been owned by the whole family and Masih Maud Islam was not given any share of that. Ultimately, they died, leaving the whole property to Masih Maud. There is no other next of kin to inherit. So all these houses I am talking about, they became our houses ultimately. Or those belonging to Mirza Ghulam Muhammad, for instance, who became an Ahmadi. So I once inquired from an old man, his name was Baba Sandhi. His family is now residing in Germany and other places. God has blessed him so much. He was a devout Ahmadi, but a family servant of old. He told me that he used to serve Mirza Chiragdin during his last days of illness. And he began to lose his mental balances out of shock of seeing nothing alive. Everybody was dying out, and a whole house filled with people and children was being emptied. So in the last days, he used to ask me, go away, run and call that lady, call that boy, call him and call him. And he told me that I would always respond by telling him, the rooms are locked, the houses are locked, there's nobody in. Nothing left. And he lamented, he said, nothing left. He said, nothing left. This was the actual state, and that is why I have been throwing challenge to the whole world. Bring one man from that family who rejected Masih Islam. Whose plant he was, you see? Now we begin to recognize it was Allah's plant. And he saw to it that this would flourish and all the rest of the plants would be destroyed. So when we draw the attentions of these so-called ulama and their toadies, that as Masih Islam was planted by the British, and this proof of that, one I have also mentioned, another proof is that during the British rule, they flourished, and nobody could stop them. So, despite the fact that he was a false person, he did not come to a tragic end because of the British support. We, of course, wanted to destroy him, the ulama said. But what could we do? British Raj was so big and it was a very powerful government. So, that is the reason why he flourished. It's not a sign of Allah's closeness or dearness or Allah's regard for him. So they said, your argument is meaningless. It was not Allah who supported him. It was the British who supported him. We say, all right, although there is no sign, no evidence whatsoever, let's take your word for granted for a while. So if he was planted by the British, and if you wanted to destroy this plant, on whose side was Allah? Tell us. First decide this issue. He has to be on your side. Now they have to admit, yes, Allah was on our side. So let's see the bout, a great competition between two warriors. One, on one side, the ulama, all the ulama of the world together with Allah standing behind them. On the other, one Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian with the British Empire behind him. Who wins the contest? Who wins the battle? You say it was the British who rendered us helpless. We wanted to destroy him. But what would we do? I tell them, why don't you read the Quran, what the Quran has to say about it? The Holy Quran says, وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْضُ الْأَقَاوِيلِ لَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ بِالْيَمِينِ ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ فَمَا مِنْكُمْ مِنْ أَحَدٍ عَنْهُ حَاجِزِينَ. The message is clear. Allah says, you say, he taqawwala ala Allah. Allah says, man taqawwala alayya, and that is the meaning, of course. What I do to him? He said, I take him by the right hand and destroy, sever his lifeline. Destroy him, demolish him. And none among you can stand between me and him. This should be remembered in context of our discussion. Now, the ultimate result of this would be, if you analyze the whole situation, that this verse was revealed about 1300 years before the time of Masih Islam. At that time, of course, there were no British. So, because there were no British, so this verse stood good. But when the British came, when they decided to stand between Allah and the recipient of his wrath, then Allah couldn't do anything. Allah said to them, you know, that is my end. I can reach this far, no further. This is the practical unity. Yes, this is what they believe.
Yes, yes.
That Allah and Mullah on one side, one man, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, being supported by the British, not visibly. That also is receding somewhere in the background. You don't see any sign of his help. Yet Allah fails to destroy him despite his positive commitment in the Holy Quran. So what do you infer from that? the mullah. In fact, what you are trying to prove is that Allah is not God, it is the British who are God. And because this God was against us, so we couldn't do anything. So then I turn to them again and tell them, all right, when the British rule came to an end in 1947, let's start from there, a new beginning should be taken. When you are given full support by the so-called Muslim governments of Pakistan, when they are all on your side and they all are bent on destroying Ahmadiyya, what happens to them? What happens to Ahmadiyya? Where are they today? Where is Ahmadiyya today? What is the state of Pakistan, who is such a favorite of Allah because they are #1 enemies of Ahmadiyya? What is happening to them themselves? And what is happening to Ahmadiyya today? This is a long story. I'll turn to that later on. Inshallah. But now you better start translating, yes, because the time is running out.
Inshallah.
Now we know who is helping whom. Ahmadiyya is not helped by any government in the world whatsoever. Ahmadiyya is the only religious community in the entire world, and this is again a challenge to everyone, which is not funded by any government of the world whatsoever. The proof, all our expenditure and all our incomes are budgeted, openly published, and audited by all the governments of the world wherever we are. Even during Zia's regime was so rabidly against Ahmadiyya, attempts were made to find out any flaw in our financial affairs. They could find none. This is the only community which, with entire integrity and honesty, keeps all the funds it receives from the members of the community, budgets them, publishes them, and expenditure is also shown. So everything is there for anybody to see. Nothing is secret about it. So we are not funded by the British, but those who say we are funded, I will read proofs from authentic books that they have been funded, they have been planted by the British. Their madaris I have mentioned, the institutions, yes, and religious. Yes, yes, now Saudi Arabia is their main mentor and supporter. I'll quote from the historical, dependable, authentic historic books of history that Saudi Arabia was funded throughout its attempt to establish an empire of their own regime. And they were given arms, they were supported, they were not permitted to have an independent foreign policy at all. Whenever they fell foul, even so slightly, of the British, and when they brought them to books and questioned them as to why they did it, they fell down, prostrated before them and said, "You are our father, you are our mother, you are our everything. For God's sake, forgive." Now these are non-British agents, who have been funded, who have been installed. And we are the British agents, whom the British never paid a penny to support their cause.